Hello everyone. The last and final factoring technique that I'm going to teach you about is something called group factoring. Now if you look at this example problem, how many terms do you guys spot in the problem? I do see 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. Okay, so if you see 2 terms and you're subtracting and you have perfect squares, you're going to use a difference of squares. If you have 3 terms in a quadratic, you're going to use general factoring, which I taught you to factor using slide and divide. And then the final technique, if you have 4 terms, technically 4 or more terms, in this class you're only going to see it with 4 terms, but if you have 4 terms, it doesn't matter what the highest exponent is. Okay, as long as you have 4 terms, 4, okay, that is giving you the hint that you will be using group factoring. Okay, which group factoring kind of combines what I taught you with GCF factoring a little bit. So if you can find the GCF, you're going to be awesome at group factoring. Okay, let's begin example 6. Okay, so when we group factor, the first step, you're always just going to group the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. Okay, it doesn't really matter the order that, well, it does actually matter the order that it goes in. Okay, so yours always, it must be in standard form, which if you see here, it is in standard form. Okay, and then I'm just going to group together in a parentheses the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. Okay, you have to do it that way. If you don't group the first 2 and last 2 terms, it's not going to work out in the end. Okay, so just take my word for it. Okay, so I'm going to group my first 2 terms together. Okay, which my first 2 terms are 5t to the 4th and 20t to the 3rd. So plus 20t to the 3rd. And then I'm going to have a plus sign because we are adding these 4 terms. Okay, then I'm going to group together my last 2 terms. So plus, the plus sign just kind of got brought down, plus 6t plus 24. So I grouped the first 2 and the last 2. Okay, the next step when we do group factoring is we're going to factor out the GCF in each parenthesis. Okay, so let's look at our first parenthesis. What do you guys think is the GCF? Okay, so I'm going to look at the 2 numbers, my 2 coefficients. The largest number that will divide into 5 and 20 is 5. And then remember, when you have variables with exponents, you always use the variable with the smaller exponent when you find your GCF. So this will be 5t to the 3rd. Okay, and then I'm going to identify the GCF in my second parenthesis. Okay, so let's look at the 2 numbers, or my 2 coefficients. What is the largest number that will divide into 6 and 24? Holy hot dog, it would be 6. Okay, and in this parentheses, both of my terms do not have a t in it, so I cannot include a t in my GCF. Okay, and then from here, we're going to factor out the GCF. So remember, when we factor out the GCF, I'm going to write my GCFs in the very front of my parentheses. So I'm going to write 5t to the 3rd in front of that parenthesis, and 6 in front of my second parenthesis. And then you take the GCF, remember you divide every single term by your GCF. So I'm going to divide these first 2 by their GCF, which is 5t to the 3rd, and I'm going to divide each of these by 6, since the GCF of these 2 terms were 6. Okay, and then I'm going to write what's left over in here. Okay, now, the way that you know if you did this correctly, after you divide by the GCF, you should end up with the same exact thing in each parenthesis. Okay, if you do not end up with the same thing in each parenthesis, you might need to rethink what you did. Maybe there was a little mistake that was made along the way. So just be prepared. If you don't end up with the same exact thing in each of these parentheses, something happened. Okay? Well, let's see what happens. I really hope we end up with the same thing. Okay, so let's see. All right, so 5 divided by 5 is 1. So you could write 1. I'm not going to write 1 because typically you don't write 1 in front of a variable, but it's kind of up to you. Okay, and then when you divide variables with exponents, what do you do with your exponents? You would subtract them. So 4 minus 3 is 1, or t to the first power, which I'm just going to write as t. So you could write it as 1t to the first power or just t. Means the same thing. Okay, And now I'm going to divide these. So 20 divided by 5 is 4. And t to the third divided by t to the third will cancel out because anything divided by itself is 1. Okay, so my goal, if I did this correctly, I should end up with t plus 4 in this parenthesis. So let's see what happens. Okay, I'm going to divide the numbers. So 6 divided by 6 cancels and turns to 1. And I don't have anything to divide the t to. So I'm just going to bring on down my t. Bring it on down. Okay, and then 24 divided by 6 will give me a positive 4. So plus 4. Do you guys see? We ended up with the same thing. Wowza, right? Wowza. Okay, and then for your very last step, so all we did, we found the GCF of the first two terms and factored it out. Found the GCF of the second two terms and factored it out. My final step, all you gotta do, you write your GCFs in this parenthesis and the term that repeated in your second parenthesis, and then you're done. Okay? Okay, so my two GCFs, I'm going to write down here. So I'm going to bring down my 5. This is a GCF. So my 5t to the third. I'm going to bring it on down. Okay, and then also this is a GCF. So I'm going to write it here. And it's a positive 6. So I'm going to write plus 6. Okay, so I grouped together my two GCFs. And then in my second parenthesis, all you do is write the factor or the term that repeated. So I call this the repeated factor or the repeated term. That's just my name for it. Okay, so I'm going to write t plus 4 in this one. And guess what? That's it, you guys. So your factored form would be 5t to the third plus 6 times t plus 4. Which if you want to like bring in your parenthesis, I kind of like made my parentheses extra wide. You don't have to do that. Okay, I could bring it in a lot closer. Okay, so it's kind of up to you. All right, so this will be my final answer. That's it. Don't overthink it, you guys. Okay, let's get going on our second group factoring problem. I'm already excited. Let's go.